Welcome to Gluck Radio. I am Dr. Errol Gluck, executive life coach and master problem solver. Today we're here with David J. David is a leading activist and spokesperson for asexuals. He has started a website called asexuality.org, which provides a forum and education about asexuality. Jay is going to tell us what's it like being in the 1% of people who claim to have no sexual attraction to anyone. Is asexuality a disorder or a sexual orientation? What does romance without sex actually look like? How do they feel about living in a world that is so sexualized? David, welcome. So start off by giving me the definition, as you understand it, of what it means to be asexual. What is asexuality?
An asexual person is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction. So most people, when they're going throughout their lives, whether they see someone on the street or they're in a close, intimate relationship with someone, feel the desire to make sex a part of how they connect with other people. And asexual people don't have that desire. Or to be more precise, we're sort of on the very low end of the spectrum around that desire. Other than that, we have the same desire for intimacy, for emotional connection that everyone else has. So I have a desire to form close relationships with people, just not a desire to make sex a part of those close relationships.
Okay. Now, when you say on a low level, is it a muted type of sexuality that simply doesn't seem to have a voice, or is it something that is simply missing from the particular DNA?
We don't really understand the biology of it the same way we don't understand the biology of why people are straight or gay.
Right.
What I can tell you is that it's not really muted in that there's not a thing that we want to do that we're prevented from doing. It's like we just don't have it. It's very different from celibacy. So it's not that we're choosing not to be sexual with people. It's that attraction, that sort of desire to make sex a part of how we connect with people, never manifests. The other thing that is that being said, though, it's important to realize that asexual people our bodies still function the way that everyone else does. So we still can experience arousal. Most of us can still experience sort of pleasure. It's just we don't have a desire to make that part of our relationships. The same way that a straight guy doesn't have a desire to make sexuality a part of his relationships with men. We don't have a desire to make sexuality a part of our relationships with anyone.
So will an asexual have the desire to masturbate or wake up with an erection?
Yes. And we found that according to scientific research that's been done on this, asexual people are as likely to at least try masturbation as everyone else in the world. And, that's not a bad thing, right? Like it's a thing that feels good. It's a way to relieve stress. It's really different than experiencing sexual attraction in a relationship and like sex with a partner, which is very, very different than masturbation.
I'm fascinated about this. So the masturbation is a physical release, but not necessarily a sexual act per se, correct? Is that what you're saying? What would an asexual person be thinking as they're masturbating?
So there's been kind of anecdotal discussion about this. So it's a diverse community. Like
talk for yourself. Do you masturbate?
So I've tried it. It was all right. It's a pleasurable thing to do, and and asexual people, and it tends to really range. So I think some asexual people will fantasize, but not about things that they would want to do themselves. Other asexual people just kind of be present in the moment while it happens. The metaphor that gets used is that it's like cleaning out the plumbing. It's a biological function that people go through, and less of it's not kind of a rehearsal for sexuality with a partner, the way that it may be for a sexual person.
Now, question: do you have a girlfriend?
I have a romantic partner who's also asexual.
Okay. Now, when you are with your partner and there is romantic feelings, I want you to tell me now the difference between romantic feelings that you experience and how it is different from a, let's say, heterosexual or homosexual having romantic feelings and sexuality just being an extension of wanting to express themselves. So tell me what the difference would be.
Okay, and I can tell you the difference because I've been in romantic relationships with sexual people in the past, and now I'm in a romantic relationship with an asexual person. And the difference is when I'm sort of with someone that I care about a lot, and we're really into one another, and we want to express that. If you sort of imagine a giant pie chart, and there's one tiny sliver of that pie chart that is sex, and the rest of the pie chart is anything you can do to express how you feel to another person. Anything you can do with your body, anything you can do verbally, anything you can do intellectually, right? When I've been close with sexual people, we're expressing how we feel about one another everywhere, but there's kind of this gravitational pull from them towards the sex, towards that tiny little bit that's sex. We're kind of like drawn into it. When I'm with an asexual person, we're not drawn in. And we just kind of explore all the different ways of expressing how we feel to one another without feeling pulled towards this one tiny way of doing it.
Now, maybe I'm using the word sex with too much of a broad stroke. Does that include, in expressing the way we feel, would that include a back massage, tickling? Would it include, gentle kissing or a warm embrace? Is that sex, or is that just normal romantic expression?
So many asexual people, including me, really like touch. And there's lots and lots of ways we can be physical. I'm using sex to refer, so it's a definition that changes for everyone. For me, it kind of means stuff that has to do with genitals. Like for me, when touch begins to be really focused on genital stuff, it kind of just stops making sense to my body in the same way that a back massage or cuddling makes sense to my body.
So will kissing make sense to your body?
Yeah, and that changes from person to person. So for me, I really like kissing, and there's other asexual people who don't.
Do you find that most asexuals come out of a heterosexual or homosexual background?
So it's a range, and within the community, so even though we don't experience sexual attraction, we do experience romantic attraction. People will feel a strong desire to spend time with someone. And so there are people in the community who are homoromantic, are heteroromantic, are biromantic, panromantic. And we find that there's a full spectrum there. So there's asexual people who are asexual and gay, or asexual and straight. And also, even among people who are asexual and straight, there's a strong affiliation with the LGBT community. There's a sense that that we are part of this big social discussion that's happening around sexual diversity and how to deal with that in a way that's, healthy and sane and good. And so many asexual people will identify as queer, or will feel like we'll march in pride parades. We use phrases like coming out. So in that case, it's affiliated.
Now why queer in the sense of different? Queer in the sense of, how would we use that word? Because asexuality on some level sounds as if you are exploring other parts of human interaction and discounting genital interaction. It simply sounds as if that your body is looking to explore in a different way. So how would that be queer?
So queer, in the way that I'm using it, is kind of this umbrella term for people who fall out of the sexual norm and the gender norm.
Okay, so anything that is out of the norm. Okay, I
Yeah.
got it.
And people who are out of the norm and who feel like that's a good thing to be celebrated. And I think that when you look at why we come together as a community, there's definitely, it is a struggle for asexual kids to grow up in a society that tells you need sex to be happy.
How would
And
you
that tells
notice,
you that you need sex to be intimate.
David, when did you first find out you were asexual? It's a big question. When did you first find out that you were asexual? Did you have sexual intercourse and it didn't feel right to you? And how would a parent notice, just the way any good parent wants to support their child, whether they're, whatever their sexual orientation is, how do you notice asexuality within a child?
So I came out, I sort of started thinking of myself as asexual around the age of 14. Before then, I'd known that all my friends were talking about sexuality and sort of figuring out this experience that I just didn't feel. And the and it wasn't until the age of 14 that I sort of said, okay, this may be more than just a phase that I'm going through or something that I'm going to get over. This may be the way that I am. And I should start thinking about that rather than assuming it's going to change. And that was really scary for a long time. It took me all of high school, really assuming that there was something pretty deeply wrong with me to get to the point where I said, you know what, I think this might be okay. And when I got to that realization around the time when I started college, I came out to my parents, and at first they were really concerned. They wanted to, they thought it was a phase I was going through. They wanted to make sure I wasn't limiting myself. And then as I shared with them more of my experience as an asexual person, they came around and are now incredibly supportive.
Now, would an asexual...
There were a couple other questions in there, too.
Yeah, there were lots. I just want to ask this, want to interject this. Would an asexual man or an asexual woman, would they have the same testosterone or the same hormonal levels as a heterosexual or homosexual?
So as far as we know, yes. Anecdotally, a number of asexual people have gotten their hormone levels tested, and their hormone levels are all generally in normal levels. I know that if I had low testosterone, there would be a lot of effects in my body that don't exist. We're still trying to get better scientific research on it. Unfortunately, in the U.S., it's hard to get research funding on sexuality that's not curing an STD or researching female Viagra. It's the only two things that get funded. And so we haven't gotten as much science as we'd like.
Okay, great. So answer the question. Now, your parents, do you feel, handled it right? And how would you notice that a child is leaning towards asexuality? Were you a social child?
Yes, I was very outgoing. I'm still very outgoing. I have lots and lots of friends. That, like everything, is a spectrum. It's a very diverse community. So there's social people, not social people. People have a really strong desire for intimacy. People who, have big crushes and fall head over heels in love every other week. People who tend to be more reserved and how they experience intimacy. If you're a parent and you're wondering whether or not your kid is asexual, sort of the first thing I'd say is don't try to guess. We make a really big point in the asexual community of saying, and asexuality is a tool and not a label. It is a word that people use because it makes sense for them to use it. And if someone hears the word asexual and thinks, wow, that really resonates with me, or they hear the word gray A, which is the word for people on the spectrum between sexual and asexual, and they say, wow, the word gray A really resonates with me, then they can pick that word up and they can use it, and everyone in the community will respect it. But if someone hasn't used that word yet, then we won't put it on them. We'll never point at a person who doesn't think of themselves as asexual and say this person's really asexual, because that's not our role to do that. And so I would say, if you're a parent, don't try to guess whether or not your kid is asexual. If your kid comes out as asexual, then great, that's a thing to celebrate, and you can do research on the asexual community on asexuality.org to learn more. It's a great community. There's a lot of support there. There's a lot of really positive experiences of intimacy and life and everything that people in the community are having. So when your asexual kid comes out, it's not like they're missing out on something important, but I would say really deeply important in life. And I would say the other thing to be aware of is if if you're a parent and you have a kid who is not, doesn't seem to be interested in sexuality in the way that you expected your kid to be interested in sexuality, then I wouldn't necessarily jump to the conclusion that that's a problem.
Okay, and I'm going to imagine that, to be honest with you, in most conservative and religious families, asexuality is probably seen as spirituality and good self-control, when in fact it's simply no desire. On the same token, a question, and I'm curious about your thought about this, about couples who actually love each other, been together for many, many years. I've actually treated some who have very little to no sex in their life. Could they possibly be asexual and not even know it?
So they could. Again, I wouldn't put the label asexual on them unless they said, "Wow, this word really makes sense to us. It really describes us." I'd say that asexuality, so kind of living your whole life not experiencing sexual attraction, is different than being in a relationship where sexuality stops being a thing that makes sense.
I see. So
that
not experiencing sexual attraction. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What happens if you identify as asexual and you're with someone, a partner, a romantic partner? Do asexuals marry? I'm assuming yes.
Yes, sometimes.
Okay.
Some asexual people get married. Some asexual people wind up in very committed partnerships that look, kind of like a close best friendship. There's a whole range of ways that asexual people think about intimacy. And this is the point, kind of getting back to the question about a married couple. The real central discussion in our community is, how do you think about whether or not you have the intimacy that you want in your life, regardless of how much sex you're having. So if you've got a married couple and they've stopped having sex, and because of that they're both really anxious and they both feel like they're not connected anymore, well, that's a problem, and they should think about how to get intimacy, that feeling of intimacy back in their life, whether or not it involves getting sex back. And if they have stopped having sex, but they have all these other ways to show that they care about one another and they're both really happy, then great, that's not a problem.
What happens, and I'm asking this seriously, I'm not actually trying to make a joke. What happens when an asexual couple one day wakes up and, just through hugging and sleeping together, they begin to arouse one another? Do they get thrown out of the asexual community? Is it something that if it happens, you can't go back?
So you definitely don't get thrown out. It's not like celibacy. Asexual, you're asexual is, like I said, the word makes sense for you to use. And there are some asexual people who will have sex, usually asexual people who are in partnerships with sexual people, and it's a compromise, a way of expressing intimacy that they think works for them. Sex between asexual people and sexual people is complicated. It's different than sex between two sexual people.
Tell me how
it plays
so.
a different role in the relationship, but it happens.
Tell me how it's different.
So imagine two people who are partners who go to a football game together, who are both huge football fans, and they spend the whole time cheering together, really into the football game. And then imagine two people who are partners, and one partner is really into football, and the other partner has no idea what the rules of football are or why everyone's so excited about it. But they go along and they sort of, get excited about the cheerleaders, and they like eating hot dogs, and all the peripheral things that are not actually football that are happening at the football stadium are entertaining enough that they can have an all right time.
You just described half the country. Everyone who's the tens of thousands of listeners are going to say, now I know my wife's asexual. Now what do I do? So what do you find out? And this is serious. What happens if someone's listening to this and they realize, my God, I've been angry at my spouse all these years, and I realize they do love me, but they're just asexual. Do they approach them with that?
Well, so you don't want to tell someone else that they're asexual. If you listen to this and you have a friend or partner or someone else who you really feel like is struggling with how sexuality fits in their life and not feeling understanding a lack of sexuality in themselves, then letting them know that community exists, letting them know that resources exist in a very subtle way can be helpful. I think that the most important thing to do, if you think this applies to you or if you think that this applies to something you care about, is to really kind of reframe intimacy to be more than sexuality. To think, all right, what are all the different ways that I'm developing the relationships that I want in my life? What are all the different ways that I'm exploring the kinds of touch that I want in my life that that are kind of bigger than sexuality? Because that tends to be where.
But David, shouldn't we be doing
yeah.
that anyway? Even if we're even if we're heterosexual, homosexual, shouldn't we still explore the different types of intimacy outside of sex?
Oh yeah, totally. And I think it just becomes more important when talking about the asexual community, because that's how you access intimacy and how you access connection. Period. But I think it's something for everyone to be doing, definitely.
So give me an idea of a wonderful asexual date.
Oh man, I mean, it varies a lot.
I said, I want David J's idea of an asexual date.
My idea of a really amazing asexual date is I'm a huge nerd and a huge social justice fan. So some of the really amazing dates that I go on involve, people going to some lecture or talk that's about, something geeky, like how the city of New York is preparing to fight disasters, and me and the person I'm on a date on connecting with lots of people and having a lot of really intense, interesting conversations about how the city of New York is doing this and about how the city of New York could be getting better at doing this. And then we go home and we keep having a really intense, fascinating intellectual discussion. We eat really good food and a really good dessert, and then we cuddle.
Okay. Sounds like it sounds like an interesting evening. It's not really nerdy to talk about disaster relief. In the cuddling, how is the cuddling different than the cuddling between a mother and a father, or a brother and a sister?
So I can say this somewhat. I will say that because of agreements with my partner, I don't talk about the specifics of what we do physically on the air. But it is so the kinds of touch that I like tend to sort of it tends to range. So there are everything from kind of low energy touch, which is like back rubs or just holding one another, to higher energy touch, which is more kind of like pushing and pulling on one another's bodies or wrestling or something. Like there's a wide range to touch that's really goofy. There's a wide range of ways that I can be physical with another person that are fun, that don't sort of like gravitate towards sexuality.
So we're using sexuality as a particular experience that one experiences physically in the brain, as opposed to experiencing sense of smell, touch, taste, and tenderness. It sounds to me like it's a very, very, very thin line.
I think it is, and it's also, like I said, it's not that asexual people are kicked out if we cross that line. It's that we are not drawn to cross that line the way that sexual people are.
Okay, so you could still be asexual, and occasionally you cross that line for whatever reason, even if it's just we had too much to drink, which is probably my next question. Is drinking and drugs the same in the asexual community as it is in the heterosexual or homosexual community? Do you find there's any differentiation in how much they drink or recreational drugs, like alcohol or pot?
I found when I hang out with asexual people and gray A people, most people tend to drink less than in the sexual world, and I don't know why that is, but anecdotally, there's sort of less interest. That could be random. I do know that for me, when I'm in social situations, like parties, which I love going to parties. I'm a big partier. everyone else tends to be drinking, and part of their drinking is that it makes them less inhibited. And it's kind of easier to sort of be free-flowing and sometimes easier to hit on people when you're drunk. And for me, when everyone else is being free-flowing and hitting on people, I have to kind of do this mental translation work of turning their sexuality into something I understand and figuring out how I'm going to interact with it, because it's not intuitive for me to be in situations with sexuality. And so it's easier for me not to drink because I kind of need my mental facilities to navigate that.
David, what you need to do is when they get sexual, just ask them, how would you feel if New York was going to blow up tomorrow? Just go back to disaster relief. That'll always sober them up.
How would I feel about what?
If New York was going to blow up tomorrow, something that would make them think. No, I'm only teasing. Question. Because of the need for bonding, do asexual people tend to find that they have more friends? Because generally when people are in sexual relationships, they tend to limit their friendships, and the majority of time is spent with the one person who's their significant other. Do asexuals tend to be more community-oriented and sharing more time with more people because there's not the need for monogamy in an asexual relationship? Or is there monogamy in asexual relationships?
So the answer to both questions is yes. Within the asexual community, there's much more of a focus on communities of friends as a source of intimacy. And there's this sense that if you have having a really strong community of friends is as powerful and meaningful and important as having a romantic partner. And for that reason, people won't use the word single in the asexual community. There's this sense that everyone has intimacy in their lives, whether it's intimacy with a community of friends or intimacy with a partner or some combination thereof. And what you want is to ask someone about the intimacy they have, about the friendships they have and the partner they have, and sort of how they're growing that, rather than assuming that if they don't have a romantic partner, then they're quote-unquote not with someone.
So, David, if they have a romantic partner, what is cheating like, considering intimacy is experienced differently in the asexual community? How does one cheat as an asexual?
So it's a kind of complicated and fascinating issue, and it's something that we're sort of forced to define explicitly in a way that most sexual people aren't. So for me and my partner, we have to sit down and say, all right, what commitments are we making to one another?
Just give me an example. I'll only eat a hot dog with you. I mean, tell me what those commitments would sound like, considering that you're not relating to other people sexually.
So for us, it is most of our commitments are about how we're there for one another in our lives. So I commit to being there emotionally to support my partner, to sort of spending a certain amount of time together. And if I were to prioritize other relationships above those commitments and stop being able to show up for her, then that would be considered a violation of a commitment in a relationship. We also, we aren't prevented from being physical with other people, but if we're physical in certain ways with other people, then we check in about it, and kind of have a conversation. And so we, in that way, it's almost more like a poly relationship, poly cuddling, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Very interesting. Do you find that asexual people are inherently less aggressive, less jealous, less violent, less prone to choose as a profession to be in the military?
So I can't really anecdotally answer that question because I don't have many sexual friends who are violent or aggressive, so I can't really compare, or many asexual friends who are. I would say that I don't really have any information to support that question. I do know of a couple of asexual people in the military, and I know of at least one case before back in the days of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, where someone kind of received difficulty being in the military for being asexual. But But I also think that
No, why? I'm confused. Why would they have difficulty being in the military for being asexual? If asexual, you're not acting out. There's no rules against that in the military.
I think that their asexuality was confused with being gay, which is something that happens a lot, and then that led to discrimination. I would also just sort of challenge the idea that service in the armed forces is about a sense of aggression. Like, I think that most people who serve in the armed forces have a very different sense, a very different set of motivations for why that's something they feel compelled to do.
No, I completely agree, and I'm 100% behind our military, which I actually admire and appreciate. But one has to have the aggression enough to kill another person, otherwise you can't be in the military.
Yeah.
What would you want to see happening on a awareness level in terms of making people aware of the needs of asexuals and how to help a asexual child develop more supportively?
So I think the key, because the key to helping asexual kids really understand themselves and explore themselves is creating a way that people can explore connecting with other people without assuming that it's going to look sexual. And this is, I think about this a lot, because within the asexual community, most of the people who are really active are people in their late teens and early 20s who are trying to figure out this question, trying to figure out how do I form the intimacy that I want in my life in a society that assumes the only way to do that is through sexuality. And a lot of this. Go ahead.
Again, David, because it's confusing. With my friends, I'll hug them hello. With people who I like. They'll normally be the perfunctory kiss, whether it's the European kiss on both cheeks or one cheek, but you would not classify that as sexual. You would classify that as just normal social interaction, correct?
Yeah, I would classify that as affectionate.
Right.
You're not doing that because you're sexually attracted to those people.
Correct.
You're doing that because it's a way of expressing that you care about them. Yeah.
Correct. So how would one even be able to identify an asexual versus just anyone else?
So again, I would encourage you and your listeners not to diagnose people as asexual. If someone identifies as asexual, then they're asexual and you should respect them and use that word. If someone doesn't feel sexual feelings and is really struggling with that, then kind of very subtly letting them know that an asexual community exists is a good idea. If you don't know whether or not someone experiences sexual feelings and they don't appear to be struggling with it, but they're not explaining that to you, then that's none of your business. There's no need to guess. And if you're really kind of asking this within yourself, if you're a listener and you're trying to understand, look, am I asexual or not? Then probably the best thing to do is go to asexuality.org. Start reading some of the stories of the asexual community and the experiences that we have, and also people who.
So this is what you would This is what you would suggest to someone who would be thinking this, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Go to the community, start reading stories, and if it resonates with you, and if the word asexual kind of helps you understand yourself, then awesome, pick it up, use it. You don't have to use it forever. Use it for as long as it makes sense for you to use it, and feel free to, tweak and redefine the definition to more just precisely describe who you are. And if that makes sense, then great. If that doesn't make sense, then that's great too, and don't identify as asexual.
David,
our one goal is to help people understand themselves.
It sounds actually like a very supportive, very loving, very interesting community. And one that I probably experience in my profession as an executive life coach. I've definitely seen people who would fit into that category. But let me ask you about others, about those who've had sexual abuse and become asexual as a result of that abuse. Should they, in fact, from your perspective, try to undergo the healing to return to a normal sexual life because that's their potential? Or should they just go with the flow of what may be easier, and that is to have a romantic, non-sexual relationship?
So I'll tell you that I know from kind of looking into this that there are some people who experience abuse who identify as asexual, some people who experience abuse who identify as sexual, and there isn't you're not statistically more likely to be asexual if you have a history of abuse.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know if I agree with that. And
so the research to identify, to like be a part of the asexual community, to identify as asexual, people with a history of abuse may, that is to say that people with a history of abuse may not necessarily find the term asexual meaningful. Like they not see themselves as part of a community. I think that many of them will struggle a lot with sexuality, and I don't know too much about that. I think that the important thing when someone is struggling with sexuality in that way is to say, look, the end point of that struggle is being able to have intimacy in your life in a way that works for you. That may look like having sexuality. It may not look like having sexuality. And the important thing is to think about all the different ways that you're connecting with people and being emotionally vulnerable to people, because I know that traumatic experiences like that will often limit people from being emotionally open, and that's the part of it that's almost more limiting than sexuality for many people.
David, I applaud you for being able to be forceful and powerful enough to get the DSM changed to eliminate asexuality as being a mental disorder. That was quite an accomplishment. Having said that, is there any hard scientific evidence out there supporting the concept of asexuality? Do we have a scientific research papers or a significant amount of them?
Yes, there are a number of different papers. Probably the couple most famous. There's one that looked at a very large survey on human sexuality and estimates that about 1% of the human population may be asexual, may not experience sexual attraction. There's a number of other papers that really looked into whether or not asexuality was the pathology, whether it was whether asexual people were statistically more likely to have experienced abuse or to have some problem with their hormones or to be depressed or anything like that, and found that there was no association with any pathology. And then there's other studies that are coming out that are doing things like kind of examining whether asexual people experience arousal, which we know that they do, and kind of saying, how is that different than the way that sexual people experience arousal? But science is really just beginning to understand this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated about that. Meaning, arousal sounds to me like sexuality.
Yeah, kind of like I said before, there's a difference between physically being aroused in your body and feeling attracted to someone and feeling desire to be sexual with them, and that's where asexuality is departs from sexuality.
So one could feel an attraction to someone and feel as if they want to be intimate with that person, and yet still not identify that as sexual per se.
Yes, and not feel a desire to engage in sexual acts because of that.
David, your subject matter is completely fascinating, and you are candid and direct and very well represent the movement. How long has this movement been around? Obviously, asexuals have been around forever, and this may be a hard question. From a Maslow's perspective of survivability, where sex is something that is put into the human DNA in order to make sure the species doesn't die out. Is asexuality an aberration or an evolutionary step forward?
So two really different questions. I'll answer the first one first. The asexual community, also called the ace community, ace is kind of a slang term for asexual, like gay instead of homosexual. The ace community has been around since about 2001. I founded it when I was a freshman in undergrad. So about 12 years. And we've grown a lot since then. We now have about 80,000 members. We are represented in, have been translated into over a dozen languages. So the people talking about asexuality all over the world. We coordinate. We have international conferences. And to answer your question about evolution, first of all, there isn't too much research into it, but just like homosexuality sort of exists throughout the animal kingdom, asexuality exists throughout the animal kingdom. And there's been observations of sheep and fish and penguins and every other species has asexual members, or people who don't, or members who don't appear to participate in sexuality. And if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, sexuality is just, it's a really, really complicated thing for a little piece of DNA to program, right? A little piece of DNA knows how to make proteins. And going from proteins to, I've built a brain that sees a particular kind of person and wants to do these very particular acts with them, is really, really complicated. We're bound to be very, very diverse in how we want to do that or don't want to do that. And that's a good thing, right? Diversity in any species is important for that species to survive. And I think that in the human population, if you look at, our evolutionary trick, like people aren't successful as a species because we know how to have sex with one another. People are successful as a species because we know how to form very complex, deep relationships with one another, and we know how to form a lot of them. And that's what allows us to form cities and civilizations and to build lots of amazing technology and kind of survive in every environment on the planet. And so as an asexual person, I'm contributing to the species survival by contributing to the community and the culture that we've built. And often by, raising kids, even if I don't have a desire to kind of move my DNA to a next generation. And I would add just one thing, which is if anyone's curious about this, there's a really excellent documentary on Netflix and Hulu right now called Asexual, which talks about our community, which is a great way to learn more.
It's been a fascinating interview, David, and you keep up the extremely good work of helping people identify with who they are. So many people suffer from what I call TID, temporary identity disorder, and it's very, very difficult to be happy unless you know who you truly are. And I think that you're helping people do that. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank my guest, David J., once again for appearing on our show. If you like to go to his website, which I would encourage you to do, to learn more about asexuality, because it's fascinating, visit asexuality.org. I am Dr. Errol Gluck. Remember, to every problem there is a solution. Please check out our other episodes. They're fascinating. www.gluckradio.com. We have some fantastic shows coming down the pike. You really won't want to miss them. Till next time.